Russell Broadbent, thank you very much for speaking to the Warragul Citizen. I guess first of all, and before jump to any conclusions, you will be standing in McMillan again for the Liberal Party this election?
Yes.
Why should voters put you first again?
Because of the contribution I've made both locally, and that's important. When farmers needed help, I was there. When people with disabilities needed help, I was there. People know that I'll stand up for them in a way that has been shown to be a bit different, a bit unusual for members to take the stands that I've taken.
In what way, I guess, do you consider those positions unusual?
Well, quite often people take just the party line, and sometimes you've got to fight against the party and against the bureaucracy on behalf of your constituents. And I've been brave and fair about doing that.
So I guess when people elect you, they can expect, I guess, do you have, I guess, a hardline set of views that you would have towards different opinions, or do you, I guess, when things come up, do you just deal with them as they come up, I guess, in terms of where you're going to stand on the different policies?
Well, being a federal politician, the diversity of the propositions put to you means you have to remain flexible. Sometimes you even have to change your mind as to what you thought previously would be the case, whether that's an individual constituent or that's a major policy issue that's affecting the nation. I mean, you have to remain open not only to new ideas but to new arguments.
Now, what kind of difference, I guess, will voters notice between you and other candidates?
Well, wide experience for a start. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing this since 1983. I've been consistent in my approach on behalf of people and on behalf of the nation, because there's been some national issues that I've been very strong on. And one of those is how we treat people that arrive on our shores. And Australia is a place of great opportunity and hope. And so I come from a stance of, I have to address myself to a whole lot of national issues as well as the local issues.
Now, when it comes to, I guess, those stances, I've got here the 12 policy dot points that have come out in your or your policy priorities, that are in the Liberal Party policy book, and I just wanted to raise on a couple of them. The first one is that the Liberal Party will build a stronger, more productive and diverse economy with lower taxes, more efficient government, more productive businesses. How will you do that? What's the actual plan? What's the actual policy to do that?
Well, that's a matter of process and good government. What you have just described is the dream of any government, to make sure that they have an efficient economy, the greatest opportunity for its younger and older people, a diversity of approach in how we either support industries or we allow the market to play its role. It's about how we treat our most vulnerable in the community. It means all of those things to me, and they're the sorts of decisions that you referred to in your previous question.
But there's your policy 6 is the generation of 1 million new jobs over the next 5 years and 2 million jobs within the next decade. It's a very big claim it seems a big claim to make. How would you do it, and is that actually above the projected job growth for Australia in that time period?
Well, it depends on your growth figures. If you have reasonable growth figures between 2.5% and 5%, you're going to achieve those outcomes in the number of jobs that are created across our community. When you've got as many people as we have working today, those are not really great targets. I mean, we could have set a greater target than that if you had a growth figure like China has a growth figure. But they are projected on reasonable growth figures.
But I guess what's the policy? What will you actually do to encourage this?
Well, you've got to keep your government's costs as low as possible, and it's no different to any family situation. If you're spending more than you're bringing in, you are going to run to loss. Eventually that becomes unsustainable, and you go into deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper debt.
But this is a question of, I guess, generating jobs, and it could be argued that, say, things that put us into debt, the stimulus package and so on, have allowed us to keep jobs and keep employment. So, what would be the policy to create these 1 million new jobs in the next 5 years?
Well, I think the biggest thing that comes to me from my constituency and from broader nationally is the amount of red tape in every area that even the chemists have been in today to see me, the pharmacists have been in today to see me, and they said, look, there's 3 or 4 areas of red tape which, if we just tweaked it a little bit, it would make a real difference to what it costs to run the pharmacy, what it costs to support older people in nursing homes, what it costs to deliver the services into our aged community. And I said, well, that's one thing we can look at, which will make the economy more efficient, one tiny area. but that can be extrapolated across a whole range of areas. So there's things that we can do as a nation, as a government, to make us more efficient, more cost effective. Having done that, you then flow that through the government, and you do make a change, you make a difference.
I guess so. In reducing red tape, you also run the risk of increasing it through, for example, your paid parental leave policy, and that seems to put the impost more onto businesses to be able to raise the funds to be able to cover the on bigger business, I guess, to be able to do that. Do you see a conflict there, or is that interpretation, would you say, correct? I guess would it put a hindrance on some larger businesses on being able to employ people because they will be concerned that they will want to have because they'll have to be paying. Because the government will be asking them to pay for parental leave at higher rates than I guess what the government's proposing.
Well, I think the government has a plan out at the moment. The Greens have announced a plan today that's a little bit different. I think these policies in government will be reassessed. At the moment, our party is saying, look, we want highly talented women of childbearing age to stay in the workforce or remain in the workforce, and have an opportunity. We are giving superannuation in that. So we're saying, no, you are a very, very important cog in the wheel of Australia. That's what Tony Abbott is saying to the women of Australia, and we're prepared to invest in that. We want it to be cost neutral. So we say to the very few big businesses in this country, you'll have to pay 1.5% more for us to produce that policy. Now, I think all policies can be tweaked once you gain government and you look at the impact and how it may work. I'm sure the government is about to tweak its policy on single families in this country, where they have, in my opinion, discriminated very badly against families with children, especially after they turn 8, by reducing the funds. It's hard enough to raise children in this country when there's 2 parents, and when there's 1 parent, I think it's 10-fold, 20-fold harder to do that.
Now, you just said something interesting there, that the policies will be reviewed after the election. How much of a review should we expect? How much will these policies, I guess, and given the 3 years that these policies have been sitting with the opposition, why have these reviews not taken place already?
Well, I think if you're not constantly reviewing what you're doing all of the time, I did that in business. I do that in this job. I constantly review what I'm doing. And if something is not working the way it was planned, you're obligated. You are obligated to make a change and say, did I make a mistake here? Have we got this wrong? Do we need to change it slightly? And on behalf of the Australian people, so you should if you are leading properly.
So the policy details that have been revealed so far will be implemented as stated at the moment, at least initially, before any revision, or will there be a revision before there?
No, of course you have a mandate to introduce those policies. And you and Tony, as Prime Minister of this country, will introduce those policies. That doesn't mean there won't be people around like myself who will be keeping a very close eye on government outlays into the future.
Now, on to points 8 and 9, better health and education by putting communities in charge. I guess what would that mean for the people in McMillan? What kind of involvement would they have in running?
I don't think that affects Victoria as much. I think you're looking at a national policy there. Victoria already has community involvement in the management of its hospitals, and you see that at the West Gippsland Hospital here, or West Gippsland Healthcare, whatever you like to call it, but I like to call it the hospital because people know what I'm talking about. So therefore, we already have those programs implemented. Victoria has a very good health structure. I think there could be a few amalgamations amongst the hospitals, so there was one management for a couple of hospitals, especially in the city. Outside of that, I think we have a very good structure in Victoria, and the rest of Australia looks to Victoria for the way we go about our health structure.
What about for education? Because that comes under the same, I guess, community involvement part there.
Well, what we've said about education is, now we do have school councils now, and they are really important. They play a major role. I don't know what they do in other states. I'm not really on top of that. But to say this to you, that education is really, really important, because if you can't, train people for the new jobs, we will be falling behind. And we see a lot of the newcomers to this country are at the Melbourne high schools and McRob high schools and at the best high schools and doing very, very well. So we have to take the secondary schools particularly by the scruff of the neck and improve them. Now the government has their plan for school improvement, we have our plan for school improvement. We want some stability within the education sector so they actually know where they're going. At the moment it's all over the place.
But when it comes to this point of putting local communities in charge of improving the performance of local schools, what would that actually involve?
Well, that actually involves the schools themselves the school councils taking responsibility for the improvements that they can allow in the schools. But to me,
they do that already.
Most of that is actually state-based, and our federal money goes into the private school sector and the Catholic school sector, and we've got to make sure that they get the opportunities that they should get.
Now, point number 10 is the direct action policy to reduce carbon emissions. Let's start with, I guess, a lot of people seem to be a bit confused as to what that actually involves, even after all these years this part of the policy has been in place. Could you describe what that policy actually does involve?
Well, it means encouraging people by payments to reduce their carbon emissions, and it's as simple as that. The big polluters will put in a bid for money to reduce their carbon emissions, and that's the difference in us and the government. The government have gone for a emissions trading scheme. I think what will end up in this country will be some balance between the two.
Now, years ago, quite a few years ago now, you told me that you believed that the climate change is an issue for Australia and the world. Are you convinced that this direct action policy will address this properly, or do you believe that there is a need for that, I guess, hybrid that you're talking about of the ETS and the direct action policy?
The direct action policy is just a short-term policy. I think eventually, as the world moves to an emissions trading scheme, we will move to an emissions trading scheme. That was John Howard's plan, that has been the plan, but the world didn't move. With Copenhagen, the world didn't move. Now, where there are some emissions trading schemes around the world beginning to find their balance, but at the moment, Australia, under this government, is moving towards an emissions trading scheme earlier. Now, our direct action plan, it's a short-term plan, it's not a long-term plan.
So what's
it's a short-term.
The
long-term plan is Australia in the international community in regard to an emissions trading scheme.
Right. The policy point number 11, delivering on stronger borders. Now, you've been known in the past to be opposed to, I guess, even Howard's policies on asylum seekers. Tony Abbott's are arguably much more hardline than John Howard's were. Do you believe that in stopping the boats? Do you believe in point number 11 in its policy book?
Well, it's not something I put in all my literature because it's the most complicated issue. So I would like to say that we do need secure borders, and I believe our borders are secure. We do address every person that comes into this country. We still have mandatory detention, which I don't think works anyway, but we do have mandatory detention. We do health checks, we do security checks. At the moment, because people are dying at sea, and that is the only, because people are dying at sea, the Australian community wants something done about this issue. It's a very serious issue, and especially the women of Australia, I'm not saying the men are not concerned, but the women of Australia don't want to see tiny boys drowning at sea. And they don't want to see the problems that we're facing right across the northern part of Australia with people losing their lives trying to get here, as desperate as they may be. So the government action is being accepted, even though it crosses across a whole lot of human rights issues, because people believe that it may stop the deaths at sea. And that's what it's all about at the moment.
Are you comfortable with the policy of turning back boats, though?
Well, what the coalition has said, they will turn back boats where possible. Now, there's some boats being turned back, but there are issues about turning them around and sending them back into. It's a very difficult thing to do. So, the where possible caveat is very important.
So, when it's not possible, what does the coalition plan to do?
Well, exactly the same as happens at the current time. People come into this country, they seek asylum. If they're refugees, they get accepted as refugees or sent to Manus Island by this government. I mean, you've got to look at it and say the Rudd government's approach is harder than Howard ever was, harder than Tony Abbott is suggesting. I mean, and the government's problem hasn't been with their ideas, or Mr Rudd's problem hasn't been with their ideas, even though I disagree with many of them. It has been with the implementation. Their implementation, from pink bats to schools to whatever they did, especially in response to GFC, has been atrocious. And I expect, once again, they'll muck this up too.
Now, going back to, I guess, more local issues, being so close to the Latrobe Valley, the transition to the new economy is very important. The independent one of the independent candidates, at least, I don't know if any others have been announced actually, John Parker, has suggested that you and the member for Gippsland have been ignoring the area in the transition, and I think to use roughly his terminology, we're going along for photo opportunities rather than for actually any action. What is your response to that claim?
Well, firstly, I like John Parker, and he's a friend of mine, and he's standing to highlight, I believe, his motor neurone disease. He's going to make an issue of that in the campaign. So I applaud him in that role. John also knows that I don't go anywhere for photo opportunities. I go along to make a difference. But the fact is, we're in opposition. It's the government that was proposing the good transition plans for Latrobe Valley, and then they walked away from it. Completely walked away from the Latrobe Valley. All the things they were going to do, they thought, hang on, there's no votes in Latrobe Valley, we're out of here.
So what would the coalition do differently?
Well, we're supporting sequestration. We're supporting the programs that are in place. We're supporting the continued use of the brown coal fossil fuel. Personally, I'm supporting that resource there, that we have to find better ways, more efficient ways to use.
The things you just listed there as what the coalition would do differently was effectively just a list of things you'd continue. What would be the most major differences between the Liberal Party or Lib National Party and the government's policy? What would people actually, I guess, notice as different?
Well, we won't say we'll do one thing and then not do it. Anything that we say that we'll do to help Latrobe Valley, or Darren would say, we will implement, rather than saying we're here to help, and then when the propositions comes to you to help, they walk away completely.
But when it comes to, I guess, doing new things to help, what will you do?
Well, it's for me, it's a future, as I've just explained to you, where we use that brown coal resource. That means we have to have research into how we will use that and find accommodation for new power stations, or a new power station for the future use of electricity in this state, but in a more efficient way.
So doesn't that slightly conflict, though, with the push for, I guess, you considering climate change as an issue, as quite a major issue for Australia and the world?
No, because at the same time, I said more efficient use, so reduced emissions from the same use of the resource, and at the same time looking at renewables and how we can grow renewables in Australia.
I talked to onto the NBN, so I've got my question slightly out of order there. The coalition's policy is to put a cost-benefit analysis of the NBN in, so but with higher priority areas getting connections sooner, is McMillan a high priority area?
Parts of McMillan have been, but under the NBN a lot of my small areas will miss out. I've spoken to Malcolm Turnbull about that, and I think it's important that one way or the other they get access to not the NBN but faster broadband services. So
some areas having high priority so far may be the case, but I guess will there be any additional areas of the higher priority under the coalition plan?
Well, no, we're not going to change any contracts that are in place for a start. So whatever's happening with the NBN, we're going to support at this stage. So then we'll have a look at that and say, are there ways, and as Malcolm Turnbull has pointed out, are there ways that we can deliver faster, quicker, cheaper service into the households?
Now the rollout of Superfast, this is from your coalition policy book, there's a promise that the rollout of Superfast broadband using whichever is the most effective and cost-efficient technology that you can find, and also by using the existing infrastructure. It doesn't sound like the policy is ready to go into action particularly quickly, because that's a very, I guess, a vague statement. It's not actually committing to any major, I guess, technological advances. What advances will there be? Could you explain the
Well, both you and I don't know what those technological advances will be in a year's time, 5 years' time, or 10 years' time.
But if you keep waiting, for those,
but that didn't say we'll wait. That actually said we will look at what is the most advanced technology we can use to deliver the service. What more can you do? What more can you say to that?
have a policy of what you will do.
Well, no, that is the policy of what we will do. We will actually manage the NBN properly, the most as efficiently and cost effective as we can, and we'll look at all the technologies into the future that may deliver broadband services.
Now, I talked to the Labor candidate Anthony Nouse about leadership. A week later, the Labor leadership changed. In a week, can we expect a Liberal leadership change?
No, I think Tony Abbott's doing very well.
Nonetheless, we can go back to historical examples of places where leaders have been doing well and then been replaced before an election for the benefit of, I guess, a better outcome. Hawke and Hayden is one of the most, I guess, screaming examples of that. Labor, and I think you'd agree, Labor would have won the election under Hayden, and but by putting Hawke in, they effectively increased their margin. Wouldn't the Liberal Party be better off under Malcolm Turnbull?
Well, it may have only been a couple of seats that Hawke increased their margin. What they were doing in that time was to ensure their win.
That's the situation though now, where we've got the primary votes set roughly 50-50, and you need just a few more seats to be able to push it over. Wouldn't that make sense at the moment?
Well, there's nothing on the horizon that would suggest that there would be a change of leadership in it. But, in every situation there's usually been some catalyst that caused a leadership change. And so there's no catalyst that I see today. Tomorrow may be a different day.
The catalyst that saw Brendan Nelson's leadership change was to Malcolm Turnbull was a low approval rating. Tony Abbott's is going down. Well,
that's a long time ago now, and opposition leaders do change. We saw that with Brendan, we saw it with Malcolm. Tony is doing the very best he can in difficult circumstances running this campaign.
And I guess, what are your priorities, and what are you looking forward to in this election?
Look, in this election, I'm looking forward to a coalition win, because I think we can manage the economy and this nation better. I think we can do good things for this nation, and I think we have proved in the past that we are very strong when it comes to running the economy. We're very strong on international relations. We're very strong in support of our agricultural communities. And we're very strong on getting debt down. Now, if that means some hard decisions, we'll have to take those hard decisions, but I think Australia understands that the nation needs to be managed properly, not just a fantastic number of ideas that cost an absolute fortune and then implemented very badly.
Russell Broadbent, thank you very much.
Thank you.